The road stretched out before her, empty except for the occasional set of headlights gliding past in the opposite direction. It was late, just past 11 p.m., and the highway outside Birmingham, Alabama, was nearly deserted.
The glow of the streetlights flickered, casting long, shifting shadows over the wet pavement.
A light drizzle from earlier that evening still lingered, leaving the air damp and cool. Behind the wheel of her black sedan sat Lieutenant Commander Renee Dawson. Her eyes were sharp, focused, but her body was at ease. It had been a long day, and she had spent the last 2 hours on the road, humming along to a familiar jazz tune playing softly through the speakers.
Miles Davis, soothing, steady, timeless.
Tonight, she wasn't in uniform.
No shining insignia.
No sharply pressed navy blues. Just a simple black sweater, a pair of jeans, and her hair pulled back into a neat ponytail. She wasn't Lieutenant Commander Dawson right now, just Renee, just another woman driving home, blending into the night. She wasn't thinking about ranks or military discipline. She wasn't thinking about power or authority. For the first time in a long time, she was just another person on the road. Or so she thought. The red and blue lights in her rearview mirror flashed suddenly, slicing through the darkness.
A patrol car. Coming up fast.
Thought balloon, damn it. Renee sighed, a slow exhale through her nose. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't afraid. She was tired. She knew how these things went. She had seen it happen before, had heard too many stories, lived through too many random stops. And now, it was happening to her. She flicked on her turn signal, changed lanes, and eased her car onto the shoulder. The tires crunched against the gravel as she pulled to a complete stop. Then, instinct took over. She put the car in park. She took a deep breath. She placed both hands on the wheel, where they could be seen. It was a drill she had practiced her whole life. Now, all she could do was wait. The white patrol car rolled up behind her, stopping just a few feet away. The officer inside didn't move right away. Instead, he let the moment hang, stretching the silence between them like a taunt. Then, after what felt like an eternity, the door creaked open.
Heavy bolts scuffed against the pavement.
A flashlight clicked on, its beam slicing through the darkness. The officer moved slowly, like a man who expected obedience. Through the side mirror, Renee caught a glimpse of the name on his badge as he approached.
Briggs.
She had never met him before, but she already knew men like him. His posture, his gait, the way his hand hovered just near his belt, it all screamed authority, control. Then, his voice came. Flat. Practiced.
Impatient.
License and registration. No greeting. No explanation.
Just a command. Gedankenblase allrichten.
Renee moved slowly, deliberately.
No sudden movements.
She reached over to her glove compartment, pulled out her paperwork, and handed it over. She kept her voice even, calm. Was I speeding, officer? Briggs barely glanced at her documents.
Tail lights out.
She frowned. Thought balloon, that can't be right. Her car had just been serviced a few weeks ago. She knew for a fact that every light had been checked. Something about the way Briggs finally looked at her made her skin prickle. It was the look of a man waiting for a challenge. So when she simply responded, "Are you sure?" Briggs's expression shifted instantly. The impatience in his voice turned sharper, colder.
Are you arguing with me?
Renee felt it, the shift in the air. That quiet, unspoken moment where power met resistance. She had seen it before. On military bases, in training exercises, in real-world operations where power was a currency. She knew better than to push. But she also knew her rights. So she chose her words carefully. "I'm just saying," she replied smoothly, "my lights were checked recently, but if there's an issue I can get it fixed." Briggs didn't like that.
Step out of the car.
The words were sharp, abrupt. No warning. No explanation.
Just another command. René blinked. For what reason?
Briggs tilted his head slightly. He was smirking now, like he had been expecting this moment all along. Because I said so. That was it. No law cited.
No actual cause for escalation. Just pure, raw authority.
Thought balloon, this isn't about a tail light anymore. She could see it clearly now, the game Briggs was playing. She glanced briefly toward the traffic ahead. No witnesses. No one to see what was about to happen. She drummed her fingers once against the steering wheel, thinking. She had two choices. Comply, step out, and deal with this later. Push back, demand an answer, and risk escalation.
Gedankenblase, be smart, René.
Slowly, she unbuckled her seatbelt. With careful, controlled movements, she reached for the door handle and pushed it open. The cool night air brushed against her skin as she stepped out onto the pavement. Her posture relaxed, but measured. She wasn't looking for a fight. But she wasn't about to be bullied either. Briggs took a step back, scanning her. She could feel his eyes moving over her, sizing her up, deciding how much he could get away with. Then, he spoke again.
Turn around.
Hands on the car. This time, she hesitated. Not because she was afraid, but because she saw exactly where this was going. Her voice came out steady, measured.
Vorwärts Rison.
Briggs's smirk disappeared. He took a step closer.
HS-Tone dakend.
Are you resisting? Renee held her ground. No, she answered. I'm asking a question.
For a brief moment, so meeting flickered across Briggs' face, annoyance. Amusement.
Maybe both. Then, without warning, he reached for his radio. We got a non-compliant driver here. Renee's pulse picked up. Her expression stayed neutral. But she knew. This was about to get worse. Briggs's radio crackled as he pressed the button on his shoulder. We got a non-compliant driver here. His words rang out into the night, matter-of-fact, final, a lie spoken with absolute confidence. Renee felt her pulse steady, not spike. She had been trained for pressure, conditioned for high-stakes situations. This wasn't fear. This was calculation. She stood her ground. Thought balloon, he's setting this up. She had seen this before.
Manufaktuert Eskalation.
The kind where an officer creates a problem just to be the one to solve it. Briggs took a step closer.
Turn around.
Hands on the car. Renee didn't move. Her voice remained level, unwavering.
Ami unter Arrest.
Briggs's jaw tightened. He didn't like being questioned. I gave you an order. And I asked you a question. That was the moment, the unspoken shift, the invisible line drawn between power and defiance.
Briggs lunget.
His hand shot out to grab her wrist, but she moved first. A slight pivot, just enough to make his grasp fall short. I need you to state my charge, officer.
Briggs' frustration boiled over.
His hand went to his belt, not for his gun, but for his cuffs.
You want your charge.
His voice was sharp, cutting.
Resisting arrest.
Thought balloon, there it is.
The catch-all excuse.
The phrase officers like him used when they had nothing else. Renee knew she had two choices. Comply, let herself be taken, fight this later in court. Push back now, risk escalation.
Gedankenblase Notversité.
So, she made the decision. She turned slowly, her hands lifting in surrender, but not submission. Briggs grabbed her roughly, yanking her arms behind her back. The cuffs snapped shut. Too tight. Deliberately tight. Renee inhaled through her nose, but said nothing. Briggs's grip was firm as he shoved her forward. You should have just listened the first time.
The patrol car's back door swung open.
Briggs pushed Renee inside hard. The unyielding plastic seat dug into her back. He stood outside for a moment, looking down at her like a man who had won a game only he had been playing. Then, he smirked. You don't know who you're messing with. The door slammed shut, sealing her inside.
For a moment, René justatere, wrists burning against the metal cuffs.
Her breathing was slow, measured. Thought balloon, not my first time being restrained.
Won't be the last time he fight back.
She tilted her head slightly, catching her reflection in the plexiglass partition. Calm. Composed. But beneath that, something else simmered. A few minutes passed. Then 5. Then 10. Finally, Briggs climbed into the driver's seat. He whistled as he pulled his seatbelt across his chest. The patrol car lurched forward, the red and blue lights still flashing in the rearview mirror, painting the empty highway in shifting colors. The silence stretched between them. Then, Briggs spoke. If you just kept your mouth shut, none of this would have happened. Renee didn't respond. She wasn't about to give him what he wanted. Instead, she turned her gaze to the window, watching the lights blur past. Thought balloon, this isn't over. Not even close. The holding cell was cold. Not just from the temperature, but from the feeling that clung to the walls: stale air, old sweat, metal and disinfectant. Renee had been in worse places. She had spent nights in far more dangerous conditions, in places where the walls weren't meant to contain you, but to break you. This was nothing. She sat on the hard metal bench, rolling her shoulders slightly, stretching against the stiffness settling in. The cuffs had left faint red marks on her wrists, but she ignored the dull sting. Instead, she observed. The cell was small, just 4 walls, a flickering overhead light, and the sound of muffled voices beyond the steel bars. Somewhere in the front of the station, an officer yawned loudly. The clatter of a coffee cup hitting a desk followed. It was quiet. It wouldn't stay that way. Renee knew this wouldn't last.
Gedankenblase, somebody's coming.
She didn't know who, but she knew they would. Footsteps echoed down the hallway. Not Briggs. Lighter. Quicker. Then, a new voice, young, uncertain.
Sergeant.
The voice belonged to a junior officer, maybe late 20s. The kind of officer still learning the politics of the job, still unsure how far to push the chain of command. Briggs barely glanced up from the desk where he was leaning, arms crossed. What? The younger officer hesitated, shifting slightly on his feet. He was holding a clipboard, flipping through pages as if looking for the right words. We got a call. Briggs scoffed. And? Handle it. The younger officer licked his lips, hesitant.
Sir, you nicht wanna takes this one.
That made Briggs pause. The energy in the room shifted. Briggs turned fully now, frowning. From who? The younger officer glanced at the clipboard again, then up at Briggs.
Pentagon.
For the first time all night, Briggs's face actually changed. Not the controlled arrogance, not the casual smirk, but something else.
A crack in the facade. René SAVIT.
Thought balloon, there it is. The conversation turned hushed. Renee couldn't hear every word, but she caught bits and pieces. Asking why she's being held. Somebody pulled her record. Military connections. Serious people involved. Briggs's voice had dropped lower, tighter. The young officer's voice, on the other hand, was nervous, uncertain. Renee didn't need to hear the full exchange. She already knew. Her people had found out. It was only a matter of time. A minute later, Briggs stormed back into the holding area. His boots hit the floor harder than before, his hands balled into fists at his sides. He stopped just outside the cell, looking at Renee through the bars. She lifted her head slowly, meeting his eyes without flinching.
Briggs exhaled sharply, nostrils flaring.
Then, his voice came out low, strained.
What the hell did you do?
Renee tilted her head slightly, then smiled, just barely. I didn't do anything.
She leaned forward a little, voice calm, smooth.
I just have people who care about me. Briggs's jaw tightened. He turned sharply on his heel, muttering something under his breath, then marched out of the room. Thought balloon, yeah.
Tats wat die tugt. René exhaled, rolling her shoulders again. It wouldn't be long now.
And when the truth came out, Briggs was going to regret every single decision that led him here.
The courthouse was cold.
Not in temperature, but in atmosphere, the kind of cold that settled in your bones, making the air feel heavier than it should. The room was packed. Lawyers, reporters, a few officers lingering in the back, arms crossed. This wasn't just another hearing. People were watching.
The Wodendoors swung open. Lieutenant Commander René Dawson stepped inside.
She was not in an orange jumpsuit. She was not in handcuffs. She was not defeated. Instead, she wore a sharp navy blue blazer, her posture straight, unyielding. Her presence alone was enough to make the room fall quiet for a moment. Beside her, Carla Whitman walked with smooth, calculated steps, a stack of files in her arms. Carla wasn't just any lawyer. She was the kind that dismantled careers.
René felt no fear.
She had already fought the real battle. Now, she was just here to watch Briggs lose. Briggs entered next. His stride was still firm, still carrying that same air of authority. But something had changed. There was a stiffness in his steps, a hesitation in his gaze. He did not look at Renee. Not directly. Instead, his eyes flickered around the room, scanning the prosecutor's table, the judge, the rows of unfamiliar faces. For the first time, he wasn't in control. And he knew it. The judge settled in his chair, flipping through the case files with an exhausted sigh. All right.
Let's get to it.
The prosecutor stood. A middle-aged man with precisely combed hair, the kind of attorney who spoke in measured tones but left no room for argument. He cleared his throat. Your Honor, we have reason to believe that the defendant, Lieutenant Commander Renee Dawson, was unlawfully detained without probable cause. He barely glanced at Renee, because this wasn't about her. This was about Briggs. The prosecutor continued, lifting a file from the table. Furthermore, we have uncovered a pattern of misconduct involving the arresting officer, Sergeant Daniel Briggs.
A ripple of murmurs spread through the courtroom.
Briggs shifted in his seat. The prosecutor flipped open the file. Evidence. One by one, the facts hit the room like gunfire. Small Blue Diamond Renee Dawson's military record, decorated officer, Naval Academy graduate, spotless service history. Small Blue Diamond Briggs's history, an alarming disproportionate number of traffic stops involving black drivers. Small Blue Diamond dash cam footage, proof that Renee never resisted, never posed a threat.
The courtroom ertickend.
Briggs finally spoke, leaning forward. Your Honor, the defendant was uncooperative during a routine traffic stop. The prosecutor cut him off.
Unkooperative.
He held up a document. Lieutenant Commander Dawson has led operations overseas, past some of the most rigorous military training in the country. Her record is clean. No criminal history. No outstanding citations. Are you telling me that, despite all of this, she was such a threat that you had to arrest her? Briggs opened his mouth. Then closed it.
Let's roll the footage.
The judge's words dropped like a hammer. A screen lowered at the front of the courtroom.
Briggs' face paled.
The video played. The courtroom fell silent. Renee didn't turn to watch. She didn't need to. She had lived it. Small Blue Diamond Briggs's sharp, condescending orders. Small Blue Diamond her calm voice, measured and controlled. Small Blue Diamond the unnecessary escalation. Small Blue Diamond the way he tightened the cuffs just a little more than needed. When the video ended, the judge steepled his fingers and exhaled slowly. He turned to Briggs. Sergeant Briggs, you violated protocol. You conducted an unlawful arrest. And you failed to report the full details in your initial statement. Briggs swallowed. The courtroom was dead quiet.
The judge's gavel came down.
The charges against Lieutenant Commander Dawson are hereby dismissed.
BAM. Final.
Absolute. Furthermore, I am calling for an internal review into Sergeant Briggs's conduct. A wave of murmurs erupted.
Briggs sat frozen.
For the first time in his career, he had no control. And this time, his badge wouldn't save him. The hallway outside the courtroom was buzzing. Officers, court staff, even a few reporters, all whispering, glancing sideways at Briggs as he stormed past. His jaw was tight, his face flushed red. He didn't just lose the case.
He lost everything.
Then came the worst part.
Sergeant Briggs.
The sharp, authoritative voice stopped him in his tracks. He turned. Chief Eldon Baker stood there, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. The older man had been on the force for over 30 years, respected, powerful. His word carried weight. Briggs straightened instinctively.
Sir.
Baker studied him for a long moment, then with a curt nod, motioned for him to follow into a private office.
The door shut behind them. The silence was heavy.
Then, Baker tossed a file onto the desk.
It landed with a hard thud.
What the hell were you thinking?
Briggs exhaled sharply.
I was doing my job. Baker scoffed. Your job. He tapped the file. That's not what it looks like from here.
The body cam footage. The arrest records. The clear pattern. Everything light out. Undeniable.
Briggs gritted his teeth. She was disrespectful. She questioned you. Baker cut in, voice flat. That's not a crime. Briggs's nostrils flared.
You don't get it people like that. Baker's Expression hardened.
People like what? Briggs clamped his mouth shut. Baker sighed, rubbing his forehead. Then, his tone dropped, final.
Jure Done. Briggs frotze.
What?
Baker leaned forward.
The DA is reviewing every one of your cases from the past 5 years. You've been flagged for racial profiling. And you better believe this department isn't going down with you. Briggs felt his stomach twist. What does that mean? Baker straightened. It means you're being put on immediate suspension.
Effektive now. The word sit like a punch to the gut.
His career. His authority. His power. Gone. Baker's voice was ice cold.
Pack up your desk.
And if I were you, I'd get a lawyer. Briggs stood there, fists at his sides. And for the first time he realized, he wasn't untouchable. Across town, Renee sat at a quiet cafe, a cup of black coffee in front of her. The news had already spread like wildfire. She scrolled through her phone. Lieutenant Commander wrongfully arrested, officer under investigation. Body cam footage exposes abuse of power. Not surprising. She had known from the second she stepped out of her car that night, how this would go. Briggs wasn't an isolated case. He was a symptom of something bigger. Her phone buzzed.
A message from Carla Wittmann.
Briggs is facing possible criminal charges. Renee took a slow sip of her coffee. Good. Then, another buzz. This time, a number she recognized. She sighed, then answered.
Lieutenant Commander.
The voice on the other end was calm, steady.
Familia.
Her captain.
Yasume you vese in the news.
I have.
A brief silence.
Then.
And how are you feeling?
Renee glanced at her reflection in the cafe window.
No sense of defeat.
No cracks in her composure.
Just zert einti.
I feel like I did exactly what I was supposed to do. The captain's voice softened.
Tats wat I tugt jud sei.
A pause. Then. The Department of Defense has taken interest in your case. Don't be surprised if they ask you to speak on it. Renee exhaled through her nose. Not sure I'm interested in being a headline. The captain chuckled. You already are. And whether she liked it or not, this fight wasn't just hers anymore. As she stepped out of the cafe, the air was crisp, the scent of fresh rain still clinging to the pavement.
She walked to the curb, waiting for the light to change.
Across the street, a young black boy held his mother's hand, laughing about something.
Carefree. Full of life.
Renee watched them for a moment. Thought balloon, this is why I fought back. Not just for herself, but for him. For every black boy and girl who deserved to grow up in a world where men like Briggs couldn't wield their badges like weapons. The light turned green. She stepped forward. Head high.
Steps steady.
Because this fight wasn't just hers. It never had been. This story isn't unique. Renee Dawson's fight for justice is one of many. Because for every case that gets exposed, there are countless others that don't. For every wrongful arrest, every badge abused, every person silenced by fear or by force, there are victims who never get their day in court. Thought balloon, how many times has this happened? Thought balloon, how many people have been taken in, not because they broke the law, but because someone decided they should be punished for questioning authority? Too often, power is unchecked. Too often, people like Briggs get away with it. But not this time. Small blue diamond this time, someone fought back. Small blue diamond this time, someone refused to stay silent. Small blue diamond this time, justice was served. But the fight isn't over.
Not for Renee.
Not for the people who came before her. And not for the people who will come after. Police Scarlight, if this story made you think, share it. Balance scale, if it made you angry, talk about it. Light bulb, and if it made you realize that we still have work to do, then do something about it. Because real change doesn't start in a courtroom. It starts with us. If this story made you think, don't just scroll away, take action. Like this video to help spread awareness. Share it with your friends and family, because conversations spark change.
Comment below and tell who as your two cooks.
Have you ever witnessed an abuse of power?
Let's talk about it.
Follow our channel for more powerful real-life stories. And turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Change starts with awareness. Awareness starts with you. Be part of the movement.